Good morning. Here we are for chapter 8. And chapter 7, we were left with a big cliffhanger, right? We were just at the end of that chapter. All Aki said with a very serious face was airplanes. And I really want to know what happens next, don't you? So here we are for chapter 8. And before we move on into that, let's look at our questions. That way we know what we're talking about first. So for chapter 8, you're going to have this question in your packet. The first one asks, why did Danny think the planes were in the middle of a drill? I think that's an easy one. Just remember, you really need to answer in complete sentences. Danny thought, remember, when you answer in a complete sentence, you are pretty much saying the question in it again. That way it has good evidence. So the question is, why did Danny think the planes were in the middle of a drill? Your answer could start as, Danny thought the planes were in the middle of a drill because, and your answer. You see how I just wrote that question right back into the answer? It gives you good evidence and good support for that sentence because it tells you what we're talking about. You can't just write because this. Imagine if I came up to you on the street and I knew who you were, but I just came up to you and said, hey, because you have no idea what I'm talking about, right? So you want to make sure you give me that extra. That way anybody who reads your answer will know exactly what you're talking about. The next question is going to ask you, how was Aki acting differently today? I think that one's a really good chance right there to have a really good sentence. It's a really good question. Your next question in your packet asks you, how did Danny know that the planes were not American? Next question, why didn't Danny stay in the root cellar with Mrs. Pseudo and Aki? I wonder what that is. We'll find out after we read the chapter. Why didn't he stay there? Next question, Danny leaves the Pseudo family to find his mom. Might that be the answer for the last question? Danny leaves the Pseudo family to find his mom. What would you have done if you were him? That's a very good question. There can be so many different answers to that. What would you have done? So your answer is going to be a lot different than mine. Next thing it tells you to do is make a prediction. That means make a very smart guess. Make a prediction about the next chapter, citing evidence from the text to support your claim. So that says make a very smart guess about what's going to happen next at the end of this one. What's going to happen in chapter 9, and make sure that you give me evidence. So give me proof to support your claim. So you need proof that shows you why you think this. You can't say, I think Danny's going to go back to New York just because I feel like it. Good feeling. But no, that is not support. That's not evidence from the book. So you need to tell me what you think chapter 9 is going to be about and what in chapter 8 made you think that, helped you come up with that guess. These are all very, very good questions. Those are all the questions. That's quite a bit. So now we can start reading chapter 8. Chapter 8. So remember, at the end of the last story, Aki pointed up and said airplanes. Chapter 8. Come on, Danny said, picking Aki up. We need to get you back home. Your mama will be very worried. Airplanes, Aki said, looking into the sky. Aki, you have to go home. Come on, you have to. Aki put his hand on Danny's mouth, silencing him. Shh. Airplanes. Danny almost put Aki's sticky hand off his face, but then he heard a sound he'd never heard before. A buzzing sound, like there was a giant swarm of bees closing in. Danny followed Aki's pointed finger, and then he saw it in the distance. what looked to be an enormous flock of gray birds flying toward Pearl Harbor. As the gray spots grew larger, Danny could see that Aki was right. They were airplanes, more than Danny had ever seen. And then he saw even more, coming in from another direction. There must be a drill going on. The Navy and Army were always practicing. There had been a drill at Hickam last week when 50 sailors had to pretend to be wounded. Ma had come home exhausted and covered in fake blood. Whatever game these planes were playing, Danny didn't have time to watch them. Not if he planned to catch the Carmela. He'd already wasted too much time belly aching in bed. So belly aching means just there thinking back and forth, what do I do? So he wasted too much time doing that in bed already. He needed to move on, catch that ship. But now the planes are happening. Come on, Danny said, holding out his hand. If he hurried, he'd get Aki home and then be able to hitchhike to Honolulu. He could still make it to the port in time. Then, when they were almost uphill, an enormous boom shook the ground, and then another. Danny stopped short. Fire! Aki shouted. This picture shows what they're looking at right now. Those are the planes that look like birds up in the sky. And that's Aki pointing. Fire! Aki shouted. Flames were rising from one of the battleships. What kind of drill was this? Had a pilot crashed or dropped a bomb by mistake? Danny stopped moving. Aki wrapped his arms around Danny's neck. Danny could feel the little boy's heart beating like tiny running footsteps. Together they stared at the scene over the harbor. The planes were flying so low, they seemed to skim the tops of the taller ships. Kaboom! Another explosion rang out. Sirens began to howl. Boom! 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 The sky was filling with black smoke. We know what this black smoke is called, right? Billows, large billows of clouds everywhere. My ships, Aki whispered. A feeling of dread came through Danny, a black and swirling feeling, like on that night with Finn when he'd first heard the metal of the fire escape starting to give way. He knew something horrible was happening, something beyond his worst nightmares. He gripped Aki tighter. Aki, Danny said, are those B-17s? Aki shook his head. Are they B-18s? Aki shook his head again. A-20s? Not Aki's planes. And that's when Danny knew. It was Hitler. Germany was attacking just like Mrs. Mills had said it would. More explosions rang out. The air filled up with a horrible smell. A voice rang out. Aki! Mrs. Pseudo came running down the hill. Thank goodness, she cried, grabbing Aki and hugging him. The Germans are attacking us, Danny said. Mrs. Pseudo turned to Danny. She had tears in her eyes. No, Danny, she said. Those are not Germany's planes. Who else could it be? Danny said. Who else was crazy enough to bomb Pearl Harbor? Those are Japanese planes, Mrs. Pseudo said. Japan? What had America done to Japan? Why would they want to destroy all of those ships? There were no answers, just more explosions, more of that black, bloody-looking smoke. Aki was crying. Come, Mrs. Pseudo said, grabbing Danny's hand. I know somewhere we can go, in case... Danny knew what she wasn't saying. In case the planes started bombing their houses too. They hurried up and around the back of the Pseudo's little house. Danny helped Mrs. Pseudo open the wooden door that led to her root cellar. Not much more than a hole in the dirt. Mrs. Pseudo went down the narrow wooden stairs first, and Danny handed Aki to her. Come, Danny, Mrs. Pseudo said. But Danny was staring out over the smoke and the flames. Somewhere in the middle of all that was Hickam. And somewhere at Hickam was Ma. I need to find my mother, he said. No, your mother would want you here. Please stay. She would want you to be safe. Danny knew that was true, but he ran anyway. Down the hill, toward the fires, toward Ma.